saw Dave the dope fiend shooting dope. Who don't know the meaning of water? No one's...
He goes back, you see a flaw or something that can add beauty to it, and then you just...
You gotta overlook a lot of smart mouths, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people gonna say smart things.
He was once the king of gold and silver fashion, the one-eyed icon, and the only artist who manipulated the entire heartbeat of Hollywood. Slick Rick, the most unconventional figure in 90s hip-hop. But behind that glittering gold was a life so chaotic, it shook Hollywood to its core. An artist who once stood on the Billboard charts had to wrestle with depression and substances. A man who once pointed a gun at his own cousin because he was pushed to the edge by extortion. A resident sentenced in the middle of media outrage and facing the threat of being deported from the United States. At age 60, Slick Rick's life is no longer the story of glamour, but a painful, lonely, and brutal journey. The entire truth about Slick Rick will be revealed. The final tragedy is the most shocking. Are you ready? The child born into whispered judgments. The story never told. Richard Martin Lloyd Walters was born on January 14, 1965 in South Wimbledon, London, to a Jamaican family that migrated to England with one simple hope: survival. But ironically, England never welcomed them. And the greatest tragedy struck when Rick was only 18 months old, a tiny collision of fate that was enough to shape the rest of his life. A window shattered and a razor-sharp shard of glass flew straight into Rick's right eye, leaving him completely blind on that side. Because medicine at the time did not understand the urgency of eye trauma care, the remaining vision could not be saved either. From that moment on, Rick had to wear dark glasses, or an eye patch for life. He once said he felt better covering it up. Like Sammy Davis, put it on and it looks a bit cooler. But what hides behind that cool? What level of insecurity must a child carry to use his appearance as a shield? The accident made Rick extremely shy and withdrawn. While other kids ran around and played sports, Rick stayed quietly indoors, building his own world through stories he wrote himself. That forced isolation was both a wound and a gift. It turned Rick into a master storyteller in hip-hop, but at the same time planted deep anxieties in him about his appearance and how others saw him. If he had not been isolated as a child, would Slick Rick have become the legendary storyteller he is known as today? In 1976, when Rick was 11, his family decided to migrate to the United States, settling in Baychester, Bronx, at the exact moment the neighborhood became the epicenter of the hip-hop movement. It was a cultural storm rap, exploding breakdance spreading across the streets, DJing rising in every block. For Rick, it was the perfect moment for his art to awaken, just as he entered his teenage years. At LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, Rick studied visual arts and met Dana Dane. They formed the Kangol Crew, performing in parks, small clubs, and school competitions. His British Bronx accent, eye patch, and film-like storytelling ability made Rick stand out instantly. While other rappers bragged about skills or party tales, Rick created worlds with character settings and narrative rhythm, something hip-hop had not seen yet. In 1986, Rick became the third artist to sign with Def Jam, joining LL Cool J and Beastie Boys. It was a massive doorway into the spotlight as a solo artist. 2 years later, in 1988, he fully rebirthed as Slick Rick and released his debut solo album, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. The album instantly became a classic, topping the R&B and hip-hop charts and becoming one of the first hip-hop albums to go platinum. It proved that storytelling rap was not only an art form, it had a major commercial audience. But success always has a cost. Some raw, controversial tracks especially. Treat Her Like a Prostitute made him the center of criticism. While beloved in the streets, many R&B stations refused to play it because of its offensive content. Could a storytelling artist truly survive in an industry that constantly tried to control what they were allowed to say? Rick's flashy lifestyle jewelry car's real estate turned him into easy prey in the Bronx. The eye patch that created the Slick Rick icon now made him dangerously recognizable. He became a target for robbery and extortion. The neighborhood that once nurtured his talent became a threat. Rick knew he needed protection, but choosing whom to trust became the doorway to the darkest period of his life: family or predator. The secret of Mark Plummer and the violence no one expected. The very thing that built the legend of the ruler now turned every step he took into a deadly gamble. No more casual walks to the corner store. He was now a moving target for 1,001 dangers. His mother, Veronica, believed she was saving her son. She hired a family member to protect Rick. She called Mark Plummer, a cousin who had just come from Jamaica. The idea sounded perfectly logical. Family would be more loyal than a stranger. But the Bronx has an unwritten rule. Danger always enters your life through the door you believe is safest. And that decision opened a nightmare that lasted for years. At first, everything seemed fine. Rick temporarily gained a sense of safety. But the darkness revealed itself quickly. Plummer was not just family. He brought with him a circle of criminal associates who lingered around Rick's house, tracked his schedule, asked unsettling questions that chilled the air. The house that was supposed to bring Rick peace became a war zone, where every click in the night felt like a warning that someone was approaching. Have you ever imagined being watched inside your own bedroom? Rick lived that reality every night. Then the nightmare chain began breaking stolen items his mother choked right at their doorway. Every sign pointed to one name, Mark Plummer. There was not enough evidence for police to arrest him, but everything suggested inside jobs. Rick was paying the very man trying to destroy his life. By 1990, Plummer officially shifted from protector to predator. He extorted Rick using his knowledge of Rick's schedule, finances, and home layout. One day, Rick found bullet holes in his door. Someone had fired shots directly into the house where his mother still lived. With police unable to help and family turning into threats, Rick had to do what no artist ever wants to do: arm himself. He bought several guns, from small concealable ones to powerful weapons. This was the darkest turning point. The storyteller was now living inside a real-life story, more brutal than anything he had ever rapped about. Rick said it was a period filled with fear and paranoia. He did not know who to trust. Some relatives became dangers. The pressure made him unable to create, unable to enjoy success, unable to breathe peacefully inside his own home. And then, everything exploded. On July 3, 1990, after Rick fired Plummer and refused his compensation demand, Plummer entered full hunting mode. He attempted to rob Rick, used inside information to track him, and worse, threatened the lives of both Rick and his mother. This was no longer a bluff. This was a man with both motive and capability to kill. When the only person you trusted becomes the one pushing you to the edge of death, where else can you run? The storyteller of hip-hop was now trapped in a manhunt chapter of his own life, darker than anything he ever wrote. The shooting on July 3, 1990. On July 3, 1990, the Bronx gave no warning before turning into a battlefield. Slick Rick was driving a rented Dodge Shadow with his pregnant girlfriend beside him, trying to get through what seemed like a quiet afternoon. But quiet was only the last trap before fate yanked the trigger. As he turned near East 241st Street and White Plains Road, Rick saw Mark Plummer, the cousin once hired to protect him, but who had become the true monster in their home. The moment their eyes met, no rules existed anymore, only the accumulated terror of being hunted. Rick did not wait, did not ask, did not consider. He simply drew his .22 and fired, 1, 2, then 4 shots. Witnesses said they heard as many as 6. Plummer fell, but something worse happened in another direction. A stray bullet hit an innocent bystander named Wilbert Henry, creating the second victim in what Rick called self-defense. Plummer tried to stumble into a nearby store to avoid further danger, but Rick spiraled into full panic mode. Not the kind designed for music videos, but the kind where your heart kicks out of rhythm, because your life, career, family, and safety have all been cornered. Rick jumped into the car, floored the gas, until the Dodge Shadow screamed like it was tearing apart, cutting through holiday traffic. 60 miles, 80 miles, then 80 miles per hour. His pregnant girlfriend could only cling to the door, as Rick believed the confrontation had only paused, not ended. The escape ended with a violent crash into a roadside tree. Metal, twisted glass exploded, and Rick and his girlfriend suffered severe leg injuries. And even in a half-conscious state, when Bronx officers pulled him from the crushed vehicle, they said he still resisted, as if his body remained in survival mode, although his mind was exhausted. Rick was immediately treated not as an artist in a self-defense situation, but as a threat that needed instant containment. Prosecutors demanded $800,000 bail, an amount many criminal cases never reach. Reporters pounced as if they had waited years for this moment. Rapper opens fire in Bronx streets. Hip-hop violence surges again. From children's story to real-life chaos. No one asked why Plummer was there. No one mentioned the break-ins, threats, and extortion Rick had endured. No one cared how he had lived for a year in non-stop hypervigilance. They only wanted a famous name for their headline. Rick was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, 8 weapon-related charges, and responsibility for the injured bystander. The situation was no longer seen as self-defense, but as a legal hurricane Rick knew he could not escape. His lawyer warned that if he went to trial and lost the consequences, would be far worse. And so despite feeling the injustice, despite knowing part of the truth would never be fully told, Rick had only one choice to preserve what remained of his future: plead guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, 2 years for the shooting, 3 years for immigration issues, because although he had lived in the United States since childhood, Rick was still legally a British citizen. The sentence cut through everything he had built. La-di-da-di, the show children's story, all faded into the background like stage lights switching off, replaced by the image of an artist handcuffed and sent to Rikers Island. The most bitter part, children's story. His most famous song told the tale of a boy who strayed and was pushed into a corner. Rick wrote it as a lesson for kids. But now the media used that very song to mock him as if he had scripted his own downfall. So was Rick the one at fault? Or was he the victim of a chain of threats and betrayals that pushed his mind past its breaking point? How much control can a person maintain when someone who once lived under the same roof becomes a daily danger? And if you were in that exact moment, would your heart have chosen differently? The battle behind bars. No one prepared Slick Rick for that moment. The cell door closing, and the outside world where he once stood under stage lights, and thousands of fans shouted, "The ruler suddenly falling silent." Rick went to prison, but what hurt him more was not the bars or the sentence. The deepest pain was the feeling of being abandoned at the very moment he needed support the most. And if Rick had been betrayed by friends and relatives before this time, the blow came from the place he trusted most in his career, Def Jam. Rick expected something very normal for a cornerstone artist of the label. The phone would ring, lawyers would be sent. The promise, "we will take care of you," would be honored. For years, Rick helped Def Jam generate sales, bring prestige, even shape an entirely new version of hip-hop, a storytelling world only he possessed. But when the scandal exploded, when he needed a shoulder to lean on, all he received was the cold silence of a business machine. Def Jam kept its distance. Russell Simmons kept his distance. Liar Cohen kept even farther away. They treated it as a personal issue unrelated to the company, not worth risking the label's image. What hurt most was that Rick understood very clearly if he had been a white artist born in America, with an American passport, things might have been different. He once asked himself, can a record label abandon an artist this quickly? Or do they only abandon those who never belonged to this country in the first place? Before going to prison, Rick tried to finish the album, The Ruler's Back. It was not the perfect recording he dreamed of. It was an album made in the brief window of time when he was out on bail, racing against the clock and the uncertain future, waiting ahead. When the album was released, Rick was still behind bars. No interviews, no promotional tour, no marketing campaign. The album fell into a state of neglect, as if the entire music industry wanted to bury it along with his scandal. Ironically, years later, fans discovered it was an energetic, sharp album filled with Rick's chaos and despair. But at the time, it was abandoned just like its creator. And when a product is abandoned, the artist is treated as if he has no value left. As Rick stared through the small crack of his shrinking world, another hand unexpectedly reached out, not from Def Jam, but from Suge Knight, the boss of Death Row. Suge offered to buy out Rick's contract, bring in the strongest legal team, and pull him out of the legal storm. It was an offer almost any rapper at the time would accept instantly without hesitation. But Slick Rick was different. He was loyal. He believed Def Jam would eventually show up, maybe late, but still stand by him. And he rejected Suge. That decision in hindsight looks like a scar that will never heal. Rick stayed loyal to a label that was not loyal to him. In 1991, in an interview with Spin magazine, Rick spoke openly for the first time about feeling twisted by the system. He compared himself to a character in Bonfire of the Vanities, a black man thrown into the center of a media storm where truth mattered less than the narrative people wanted to believe. Rick understood clearly that racism, immigrant prejudice, and suspicion toward black rappers were making his life far worse than any criminal sentence. He asked, "If I were someone else, would the system treat me this way?" And as the answer inside him grew clearer, he realized something bitter. The criminal sentence was not the only prison. Ahead of him was a longer, quieter, more painful form of imprisonment, a prison called the United States immigration system. And then the story turned into an even darker chapter. Because just when Rick thought he had hit rock bottom, the longest battle of his life was only beginning. Immigration issues and the 17-year war. When Slick Rick walked out of prison after the shocking 1990 case, many believed the darkest chapter of his life was over. But that was only the end of one chapter, not the end of the story. Because in America, sometimes freedom does not come from the prison gates opening, but from the stamp of an immigration officer you never see. And Rick, a British-born immigrant, now faced another kind of sentence. Longer, colder, and more dangerous deportation. A silent sentence hanging over him, with no clear end date, no clear court. Only 4 words pressing against his entire life: could be deported anytime. The moment marking the start of this new nightmare came in 2002. Rick returned from a tour and was stopped at the airport by INS, later renamed ICE. No warning, no chance to explain. Only one cold sentence. You are not a U.S. citizen. You have a criminal record. You are being held for deportation review. A sentence strong enough to drop anyone to their knees, especially someone who had just fought to rebuild a normal life. Rick was detained for 17 more months, not for violence, not for a new crime, but simply because he carried a British passport and had committed an offense more than 10 years earlier, something he had already paid for with prison time. Imagine that feeling you leave an airport believing you will go home to your family, and within minutes, your life is dragged back into the very place you escaped. How many times in life do we think we are finally okay, only for life to place another trap under our feet? During those 17 months, Rick did not know whether tomorrow he would be placed on a plane back to England or be allowed to remain in America, the place he had lived for more than half his life. He was no longer a famous rapper, no longer the ruler. He was just an immigrant being held by the system, a number among thousands waiting for deportation. The most painful part was this: everything he built in America. His career, his family, his life could disappear with a single signature. And in those darkest days, a light appeared in Rick's life, named Mandy Aragonis. Rick met Mandy in 1993 at a nightclub in Manhattan after years of chaos, and while he was trying to find peace. Mandy was different from everyone else in Rick's life. Not loud, not chasing fame, not there for Slick Rick the ruler. She came for Richard, the man behind all personas, scandals, and legends. They married in 1997 in a wedding that was not extravagant, but more enduring than most marriages in the rap world. During the years Rick fought with ICE, Mandy stood outside law libraries searching for small clauses that might help her husband stay. She called dozens of lawyers. She filed petitions. She faced the media when Rick was detained without warning. In a genre where rappers often portray themselves as tough, Rick had a different story, a man saved by his wife in the softest and deepest way. Few people know that for nearly 2 decades, from 1990 to 2016, Rick lived in a state of permanent instability. He had a house but did not know if he could stay in it long term. He had a wife but did not know if a day would come when they would be separated forever. He had a career but could not tour internationally for fear he would not be allowed back into the United States. Even signing contracts, buying property, or expanding business became risky decisions. Things others saw as stable, Rick only saw as borrowed. Have you ever lived a life where your future does not belong to you? From 2002 to 2008, Rick went to court repeatedly, several times a year. Each time was a psychological battle. Mornings when he and his wife sat staring at ICE summons letters, wondering if that day would be their last together. Nights when Rick lay awake after his children slept, asking himself if he had dragged his family into a storm they never deserved. That anxiety did not kill him, but it wore him down day by day, and it lasted for 23 years. Everything truly shifted in 2008 when New York Governor David Paterson signed a pardon for Rick. The pardon did not erase his past, but it opened a door. It proved society recognized he was no longer the man from 1990. But the pardon was only the first step. Rick was still not a U.S. citizen, and ICE still held the authority to review his case. Not until 2016, after nearly a quarter century of living in temporary status, was Slick Rick officially declared a U.S. citizen. On that oath-taking day, Rick stood in the immigration office, not wearing heavy gold, not wearing a crown, with no long lines of fans. He was simply a moved man, placing his hand over his chest, watching the final heavy chapter of his life close. A silence lasting 23 years finally broke. A lifelong burden finally lifted. A legendary storyteller finally had a place he could legally call home. But the question remains, can someone who lived a lifetime of trauma, fear of abandonment, and constant running ever truly escape the shadow of the past? Or will the cracks carved into Rick since childhood, since family betrayal, since prison follow him forever? It seemed the past had closed, but for someone who lived through trauma, his entire life the past never truly sleeps. And for Slick Rick, the real question was, never. Did he make mistakes? But how much pain must a person endure before we say, the price has been paid? The legacy left behind. Some artists walk through scandal and let it fade into oblivion. But with Slick Rick, the past did not disappear like smoke. It followed him like a shadow, persistent and patient, waiting for a moment to surface and pull his present to the bottom. Rick was not only the creator of hip-hop's immortal stories, he was also the man chased by his own life story for 3 decades. And the final chapter of that journey was full of conflict, full of anger, but also full of truths that few dare to face. One of the biggest aftershocks was the tension with Big Daddy Kane, an event many young fans today no longer know. But for those who lived through the golden era of rap, it was a real fracture. In the late 80s, Rick, already famous for storytelling, toured with Kane and Public Enemy. Everything began normally, but tensions built from the smallest details set. Time switched around. Rick arrived late, and Kane believed Rick was intentionally stealing the spotlight. In hip-hop, stage position is honor, and honor once touched is hard to keep a calm heart about. Rumors spread quickly. Suspicious looks appeared on the tour bus, and the egos of the two artists gradually turned into an ignition point. Eventually, Kane stepped onto Rick's bus and confronted him directly. Words tightened like guitar strings, emotions running backward. Kane made the first physical move. Rick pulled a small .22 from his jacket, pointed it. No one was shot, but the moment that metal touched the air was enough to freeze the entire tour, and enough to shut the door between two men who once saw each other as brothers in the craft. For years afterward, they avoided mentioning each other. No one took the initiative to reconcile. No one wanted to reopen the past. But older fans always noticed from that night forward, Rick no longer believed in the concept of colleagues. He became more guarded, tougher, and let fewer people enter his private world. But ask yourself, can an artist who grew up in suspicion and trauma ever truly know what safety feels like? After turning 50, Rick began speaking out more often, directly, boldly, and sometimes causing intense controversy. In one viral video, he publicly listed the artists I hate most, a list enough to make the entire hip-hop community debate. Many said Rick was bitter petty, but to Rick it was a release. He no longer wanted to play the cheerful storyteller. He wanted to talk about the wounds others deliberately ignored. Old fault lines, betrayals, backstage wars no one ever addressed. Then came the era of the Facebook meltdown, a dark period that outsiders only saw as unstable behavior. But those who understood Rick saw an entire lifetime of trauma rising to the surface. When a relative passed away, Rick went on Facebook and wrote words so heavy, the NYHC community was stunned. He called out people he once knew and used language that confused everyone. But behind that loss of control Was what the exhaustion accumulated from court hearings, lawsuits, months in prison, years facing deportation threats, fractured family relationships, and moments of betrayal from colleagues. Does a man who has endured so much pressure need to be perfect in the eyes of the world? Or are we demanding that Rick be numb to the wounds he carries? If you look closely, that meltdown was not rebellion. It was the cry for help of someone who spent his entire life playing the role of the strong one. A question emerges: how many artists you idolize are truly peaceful inside? Or are they simply trying to survive each day? Even so, no scandal, no matter how big, can overshadow Slick Rick's legacy. From an immigrant boy wearing an eye patch because of a childhood glass accident, Rick rose to become the pioneer of storytelling in hip-hop. He directly inspired Nas, Biggie, Snoop, Eminem, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, all of whom admitted their storytelling techniques came from Rick. Not only music, but hip-hop culture itself carries his imprint. The oversized jewelry style, the crowns, the diamond-encrusted chains all originated from Rick. The Smithsonian now displays his jewelry as part of American history. An artist once seen as troublesome or problematic is now a cultural icon preserved by the nation. The classic album The Great Adventures of Slick Rick is still ranked among the most important rap albums of all time. New generations of rappers still study how Rick builds characters, how he uses his voice to shift narrative rhythm, how he turns pain into legend. The final question for you is this: if you look past the scandals, what do you see in Slick Rick? A troublemaker, or a boy betrayed too many times using art to survive in a world far too harsh? Is his legacy glory, or a warning that every spotlight comes with a price? And if life had given Rick a different version with fewer traumas and fewer betrayals, would he still have become the legend he is today? Share your thoughts, because sometimes understanding an artist is also understanding how society treats the souls too sensitive to stand alone.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.